Every summer for the past few years, the town of Plattsburgh has hosted Michigan Month every July to celebrate the North Country's most famous culinary delicacy, the Michigan hot dog. Which, if you're from around here, you know. A Michigan is a hot dog covered in a spicy or sweet meat sauce with mustard and onions if you choose. The Michigan is a staple in North Country culture.
The Michigan is buried in the North Country culture right here.
I love the spice of it. We don't have it down in the Hudson Valley, and so you have to come back here to get it.
They're a North Country tradition. They're a classic. Can't beat them.
There is now a historical marker along Route 9 near where that first Michigan stand stood. Several Michigan stands have stood the test of time, each with their own special secret sauce.
A lot of work and a lot of love put in it.
And many fans through the years staying loyal to the sauce they love.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the sauce.
It's their sauce and the meat that they use with it.
And this summer, local author Dan Ladue has written a new book that tells the history of the famous Michigan hot dog here in the North Country. And the author of that new book, Dan Ladue, is here with us. Welcome back. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
What's the best way to describe a Michigan?
Well, a Michigan is a handheld food. It has 5 components. You absolutely need these 5. You need to have a steamed roll. You need to have a quality hot dog. You need to have a good meaty sauce without beans because it's not a chili dog. You need a sliver of plain yellow mustard and a sprinkling of white onions.
As we saw the historical marker in South Plattsburgh along the lake shore, and it was just a short ways from there, from that marker sign, where Eula Otis's hot dog stand was located.
Right, the Michigan Hot Dog and Sandwich Shop.
That tiny stand run by Eula Otis, that opened first in 1927?
That had been a fast food place for a while, and people have referred to it as a shack. There are people I've been able to interview who remember that, because the building that is there now was built by Nitzy Rabin in 1949, and prior to that he was still using a variation. People have said it didn't look much different than a fishing shanty, and he rented out that space. So they rented that in May of 1927.
And this would have been a time when Route 9 was just coming to life.
Well, Route 9 had just officially opened in 1925. I think it was November 11th is the official date of the opening. But yeah, it had everything to do with the creation of Route 9.
The story has long been told for generations that Eula brought the Michigan from Michigan in 1927. And the local lore has also often credited Eula, saying it was her creation, her recipe, this special meat sauce that topped the Coney Island hot dog. But you found that legend really isn't true.
Well, there are a number of things that have been said over the years that can't be substantiated with the literature. She was definitely introduced to a meat sauce, a Southern European meat sauce that was quite prevalent in Michigan at that time. Even Michiganians can't identify that recipe as. I have no idea what recipe Eula had. Recipes weren't really codified until the 1920s. She brought some variation of it. She must have learned how to make it, and she brought it to Plattsburgh. So yes, she is the one who is really and truly credited with, and that is why we could legitimately say that the centennial is in 2027.
In fact, in your research, you found this book that really delves into the history of the Coney Island hot dog covered in meat sauce that was so popular in Flint back at that time.
I have to give Dave Liskey credit for that. The fact that we can pinpoint the exact town is a village, really. When I looked at it on Google Earth, it's not very big. In Southern Europe, that is the exact birthplace of what we call the Michigan hot dog. But you have to remember that it was not called a Michigan in Michigan. It was called a Coney, which is one of the ironies. And the first known place to open was a Coney Island. So here they are using Coney Island, New York reference, and we're using the Michigan reference. So.
And so Eula brought that sauce, or at least a variation of it, with them when they moved here to the North Country in 1927. How long did it take for the Michigan to catch on here when she brought it here?
I think it caught on quite fast. And I posit in the book that part of her success was Route 9. The second part of her success was that it was now 9 years after World War I. There was an economic boom. People were able to buy cars. They had a bit of disposable income. They could actually get out there. The other, and I can't prove this, a lot of things can't be proven, but I don't think anybody had ever had chili powder. Chili powder was a Southwestern spice. Our cuisine here was very influenced by Quebec, which would never have used a chili powder. And I think when people tasted it, it was like, whoa, this is pretty good. I've never had this. That seems to be the only spicy ingredient that went into the initial recipes. In Michigan and in Plattsburgh, the addition of other spices comes a bit later.
How long did it take for other hot dog stands to pop up or other restaurants to start serving Michigan?
3 years. I mean, again, I'm only can look at the literature that's existent, and by 1930, you start seeing Bert Hulbert's filling station. I don't know where Bert Hulbert's filling station was, but Bert started selling Michigans. And what's interesting from a linguistic point of view is he could have used the word hot dog with a meat sauce, but he calls it a Michigan. So, and then they start popping up all over the place. It doesn't really take off until after World War II. Of course, remember, things just stalled for 4 years, and from 41 to 45. And then after the war ended, many young men were looking for work, and they opened up hot dog places and sold their variant of a Michigan. So almost immediately, the word Michigan, it comes into local lexicon.
And were they almost identical to Eula's recipe?
I have no idea. I mean, the only one that's still existent is Gus's. Gus's opened in 1951. So out of all of those shops, that's the only one that is still standing from that time period.
And do we know if Eula guarded her recipe to keep it secret and didn't share what was in it?
I don't know that, because remember, it wasn't a cult food. Today it's a cult food. Today it is our contribution to the culinary table. I doubt that she guarded it secretly. I think she just gave the recipe away when she moved out of town, and she turned over the shop.
She turned it over to Dipsy.
She turned it over to Nitsi Rabin. Nitsi had grown up in Plattsburgh and was in college, and he was a car hop for her. And she left, I want to say about 1932, and I suspect that she just gave him the recipe in the shop, because it wasn't hers, it was a rented facility. And Mr. Warren negotiated with Nitsi and said, look, if you pay the taxes for 5 years, and if you maintain this property and give me X number of dollars per year, I will hand over the deed to you. So we'll say by 1937, it was his shop. And he still used the word Michigan hot dog and sandwich shop until at some point shortly after 37, he changed it to Nitsi's Red Hots. Yeah.
And you mentioned the Warren family lived right across the street, and eventually they opened their own, which is one of the best known stands to this day selling Michigans, Claire and Carl's.
Yeah. It's my understanding that Nitsi's was the absolute king of Michigans until he shut down in 1979, which is when Claire and Carl started to pick up with the widespread popularity that it has today. They were neighbors. I mean, Nitsi's shop was across the street, Claire and her husband Carl. So Claire, who was selling hot dogs in Westchester County, likely with the Greek influence, but she was selling it with the sauerkraut, says, well, I think I have an idea. And so she opens up her stand in 1943. And I again posit that she twisted the recipe and added cumin. And that made all the difference because, again, cumin was not a spice that people were familiar with in 1943.
And then was it the 60s, the 70s when it really caught on and everyone, it became, like you said, the
No, I think it had caught on after it had always caught on, but it kept growing and growing. It's only in the 1980s that you start seeing people write about it from a historical point of view. And I'm very grateful to them because they were able to interview primary sources. They interviewed Claire and Carl and Gus and Peter Larios. They were able to interview Veronica Jetty from Ronnie's. All of those, unfortunately, they're all gone. So, but I'm grateful for what I have been able to read from that time period.
And what was it that made you decide to write this book?
I thought there is a story here, and primarily the story was, if I don't talk to these people now, in another 25 or 30 years, there will be no secondary sources. I was able to talk long interviews with a woman named Jackie Kelly. Jackie Kelly is Veronica Jetty's daughter, and Veronica Jetty opened Ronnie's in 1959. I could not have written Ronnie's if I had not had her story. I mean, she grew up with her mother. She grew up with the Michigan in the home. I was able to interview a woman named Terry Murray. Terry Murray was the wife of Mike Murray, who was the grandson of Claire and Carl Warren. And unfortunately, he died quite young, but she managed Claire and Carl's for, well, until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And she was just a wealth of information. So those were very solid secondary sources. Plus, it was just interesting. I still don't go tired of it,
The book has just come out, but what's been the response from folks who've had
I
a
think
chance
it's been
to
very
read it?
positive because, as one woman said, we just thought it was a hot dog. And I thought, well, yeah, no, it's not just a hot dog. There's a whole lot more to it. And I don't think even local people realize the history. I certainly didn't know until I discovered Dave Ladusky's book.
When you grew up here, you lived here, did you hear these stories? Did you hear the lore? Or for a long time, was it really not something that a lot of people talked about?
No, I don't think that the Michigan became what it is today until the last 20 or 30 years. I don't even remember eating them as a child. My father always liked to go to Claire and Carl's, and we would go together. And I remember sitting with Carl, and that is very typical how that happens. Your father brings you, you bring your children, likely your children will bring their children. There's extraordinary loyalty to these stands. I mean, you're not going to venture far from Ronnie's or venture far from Michigan's Plus or whatever, or McSweeney's. That is in your family. The
great thing about your book is you include several recipes, which is pretty neat.
Yeah. There are 15 recipes in there. So I requested recipes on my Facebook page, and many people sent me recipes, and I tested almost 40 of them. I had to make about 40 of them and reduced it to these 15.
You have the 15 in your book, but probably you're going to hear from people that are going to send you their recipes. There must be dozens and dozens.
And I would be welcome to that. Yes, because my plan is to go into a second edition in 3 years for the centennial. And so already new information is coming my way because people have said, oh, by the way, that's great.
The book out now is To With Buried, The History of the Michigan Hot Dog, published locally by Bloated Toe Publishing. It's available at bookstores and online?
You can find it at Cornerstone Books, at Bookburg at the mall. You can find it online through Bloated Toe.
Dan Ladue, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
By the way, the title of Dan's book, if you grew up in Plattsburgh or you have lived here for a while, you get it. To With Buried, of course, means 2 Michigan hot dogs with the onions in the roll underneath the hot dog, buried. Dan's already working on his follow-up book, which he says he hopes to have out in 3 years for the centennial of the very first Michigan stand here in Plattsburgh in 1927. And by the way, he is also working on another book about all the Canadians who have crossed the border for generations to come here to Plattsburgh, not only to have a Michigan, but also to come here. He is going to tell the story behind what is now City Beach.